Let's face it, legal risk adoption sounds, well, risky. However, this can be a really great option for families hoping to adopt from foster care. If you've been wondering about legal risk adoption and kind of what it is, you are in the right place because today I'm not only going to share what it is, but also I will share my own personal experience with legal risk adoption and how it worked out. Hi, thanks for stopping by. If this is your first visit, hi, my name is Katie, and I am an adoptive mom to 3 kids ages 4 through 12, and I'm here to guide you through your adoption journey. In addition to my many informational adoption videos and personal adoption videos on my channel, I also offer adoption consultations for those of you looking for really personalized guidance and support through your adoption journey. If this is something you're interested, I'd love to have a consultation with you, so you can go ahead and look both in the description box and in the pinned comment below for the link to my adoption consultation website. And for those of you that are kind of on the fence, you've been wondering if you should do this or not, I just want to let you know that starting mid-August, I am not going to have as much availability. So if this is something you're really interested in and you want to have more flexibility as to when we can meet, I highly recommend booking sooner rather than later because those sessions, I might take a break for a little bit in the fall. And like I said, there's just not going to be as many slots. So I highly recommend you take advantage of that now if you are interested. Now for what you're really here for. Let's talk about legal risk adoptive placements and what that really means. Like I said earlier, the term legal risk sounds kind of scary. You know, it has the word risk in it. It has the word legal in it. 2 things that for me sound very overwhelming. So what a legal risk placement is it's technically a foster care placement, but the goal is that the family will eventually adopt the child. So how's this different from a normal foster care placement? Well, the goal of foster care is reunification with birth parents. That's the number one goal when a child enters the system. That is going to be the first route that they will explore is, can this child be reunited with birth family? Would they be safe there? And would this be good for them? But sometimes that is not an option. So if you are going into it as just a foster parent, you are not walking into it, hopefully just hoping that it's going to end in adoption, because that is not generally what happens. But what makes a legal risk placement different is that the goal in this case actually is adoption. So how is this different than just a normal kind of waiting child adoption situation? Here's the big difference. If you are adopting a waiting child from foster care, which I've made videos about, that's how we adopted our children. If you're doing that, you are adopting a child who's in foster care. Their parental rights have already been terminated. They'll call this TPR, which is termination of parental rights. So at that point, there's no chance that they are going back to birth family because they've already explored that option and it wasn't in the best interest of the child. Typically in that case, you will need to foster, quote unquote, the child, but it is an adoptive placement for 6 months. I've even seen some states are only 3 months until you can finalize their adoption and they are officially legally your child. But from the very start, it is an adoptive placement and it is extremely, extremely unlikely that anything would disrupt that unless you chose to disrupt it. Legal risk placements are different. The biggest reason it's different is because in this case, the TPR, termination of parental rights, has not yet been granted, or it has been granted, but the birth parents appealed the case. So it's going back into the court system to wait on having the appeal process go through. The common factor, though, of this is that this child was already placed in a foster home that has chosen not to pursue adoption of that child or was unable to pursue adoption of that child. So now the state is looking for a foster family who would like to adopt these children because the new goal on the case plan is adoption. They just don't have the parental rights completely terminated yet. The biggest difference between a legal risk adoptive placement and a typical waiting child adoptive placement is that with legal risk, there is a risk that you as the adoptive family will not end up being able to adopt this child. However, from my experience and the experiences that I've heard from other people, it is not very likely that you will lose custody of this child at the end of the day. Another thing that makes legal risk adoptive placements a little bit different is that often you will still have visits with the birth parents throughout the process until the child is legally free for adoption. So when the termination of parental rights happens, that's when they would become legally free for adoption. So that may mean that you have to travel. If the child's from another county, you may have to travel to do meetings with the birth family, whereas in a typical just adoptive placement, you're not required to do visits with the birth family or to keep contact with the birth family, but you might choose to do so. We did choose to do so, but at the beginning it is often required because technically that parent still has legal rights to the child, and so therefore they are entitled to visitations. So let's kind of talk about the pros and cons of legal risk adoption. So obviously the con is that there is a chance that you will not be able to adopt this child. Another con is that if for some reason this happens and you decide you want to fight it somehow, then that's where the legal part comes in, legal risk. You would have to hire an attorney and try to go about that, and it's just not very likely that it would work out in your favor. Another con of legal risk adoption is that it's not going to be your straightforward 3 or 6 month waiting period before you can adopt this child. It could take years. In our case, it took 1.5 years, and we definitely did not think it was going to take that long based on the situation, but it did. So you could be waiting for a long time, but it's a little more secure than just a straight up foster care placement where you're wondering if you're going to be able to adopt at all. It's not like that. So it's much more likely to end in adoption than a typical foster care placement. But again, you would be waiting for a long time to potentially finalize the adoption after the child has moved in with you. But I also think there are a lot of pros to legal risk adoption. So one pro of legal risk adoption is I do think it opens you up to potentially be able to be placed with younger children if that's something you're interested in. It widens your pool of children that you are interested in adopting, because there are situations, believe it or not, our daughter was one of them, where the foster family they have this little child that a lot of people want to adopt, but they are not intending to adopt. That was in the goal with foster care. And so they are not going to adopt the child, and therefore they need to find an adoptive family who can do so. If you're not open to legal risk adoption and a situation like that comes up with a younger child, then you are going to miss out on that opportunity to potentially adopt a younger child if that's something that is extremely important to you. Now, to be fair, our youngest daughter was not a legal risk case. It was like a unicorn situation. It just happened. But sometimes you may find that being open to that legal risk does kind of widen your pool. And like I said, if you're really interested in adopting a younger child, it just makes it slightly more likely. Another pro of legal risk adoption is that from the experiences I have heard, it is not super likely that you will lose custody of this child. We adopted our 2 oldest kids as a legal risk placement. We had no issues with it other than it just was drawn on for a while. My biggest thing is that being open to legal risk adoptions just widens the pool of children that you could potentially adopt. It gives you an opportunity to look at more case files. And remember, just because you say you're open to legal risk adoptive placements does not mean you have to say yes to one. You can ask questions about the case, you can get more information about the likelihood of it ending in adoption, and that can really help you make a good decision without feeling like you have to say yes or it's not going to work out. You'll have a little more information to go off of. So now I will share a little bit about our process of legal risk adoption and what that looked like so you can kind of hear a real world example of this. So back in March of 2020, dare I say that fateful time, in March of 2020, we found out that we were having a potential match with our oldest 2 children that we now have. And we were told from the beginning it was a legal risk placement. However, our caseworker who does the matchings for our agency was like, I think these kids seem great. I think they seem like they'd be a great fit for your family. So I think you should look at it, but just know it's legal risk. And I was like, what is that? Like, I had heard about it a little bit throughout the process, but our last adoption was not a legal risk placement. So it was definitely a little bit different. So I did some research and I asked questions to the caseworkers, and thankfully they were able to kind of fill me in and kind of ease my mind about it a little bit. So what we found out is that TPR had already happened for our children, but their biological mom made an appeal on their case. So basically what that means is TPR was granted, but then their bio mom decided that she was going to make an appeal to try to get another chance at getting her children back. So a little bit of backstory. I don't want to give away too much of my kid's situation, but I do think a little bit of background information is helpful here. Our kids were in foster care at the end of the time. They were in foster care for almost 5 years. So they had had a long time to potentially be reunified with their bio mom. And unfortunately, their bio mom was not able to meet any of the standards she really needed to meet to be able to parent them well and get them back. But I think making the appeal was like, the way I've explained it to our oldest daughter is like, that was her way of loving her kids. That was her way of fighting for them in the way that she could. So that is what she did. And because of that, it kind of put everything on hold. And as you can imagine, March 2020, we meet the kids and then COVID shuts the world down. So now this appeal is sitting in the courts for a long time. And I hear that COVID or not, it takes a long time, but it took a very long time. The appeal on the case had actually been made the previous fall, like I want to say like October or November. It had already been sitting in the court for quite a while and it had not been reviewed. Well, it ends up that we end up having the kids move in with us in July of 2020. And all the way from July until I think it was March of 2021 was when we found out the appeal had been denied and that we were going to be able to adopt the kids. And I almost told them. I had like, I got the information, but I didn't want to tell them yet because I wanted to make it like this big surprise and make this big deal. And I'm so glad I didn't tell them because the next day, the kids' caseworker called and was like, their mom made another appeal, so you can't adopt them yet. I was like, oh my gosh, I was so relieved I did not tell the kids. I think that was God protecting us and protecting their emotions because they were really ready to be adopted at this point. Like they asked us all the time, when are we going to be adopted? We want to have the same name. We want to do all this. And they just wanted it to be official and to feel that kind of like finality to everything. And we weren't able to do that for them at that point. So the waiting process begins again, and I'm thinking, look how long this took last time. We could be waiting for a very, very, very long time. And I just had to accept it. Now, a bright spot in all of this is I was never really worried that we were not going to be able to adopt them. I never worried about us not being able to get adoptive custody because I knew that they had explored like every other option with biofamily and all of those roads had been closed. And I just didn't see a way that that was going to happen. Also, it helped to know that our caseworker told us in all the years they've done these adoptions, they've never, ever had a legal risk case not end an adoption. So that gave me a lot of confidence because they've been doing this for a long time and they've seen a lot of different cases. And so that just eased my mind and I just chose to not worry about it at all. And it worked out. So actually this year, January of 2022, we officially got to adopt them. So it was really like, it was a year and a half from the time they moved in basically, before we could actually adopt them. So it was a long time, but we got here, they're adopted, everything's fine. And despite their mom making the appeal on the case and not getting it, her and I have a pretty good relationship and we talk pretty openly over email. She does, Skype calls with the kids. And so that is something that we are able to do. So for us, legal risk adoption really worked out. I didn't feel like it was a huge risk. I definitely recommend that if this is something you're considering, asking your agency the same question I asked my caseworker, which is, how many times have you had a legal risk placement not end an adoption? Because that answer could tell you a lot. Recently, I actually got a message from one of you guys, and it was so encouraging for me to hear because she mentioned to me that she had not really been considering legal risk adoption. And after watching one of my videos talking about our personal experience, that I think I mentioned legal risk adoption, she decided that that was something they were going to be open to. And not long after they were licensed, they were matched with a great placement that was like a younger placement and great for them. And I think she said they've already adopted or they're almost ready to adopt the kids now. So that was super encouraging to me. So there's another legal risk success story. So hopefully that encourages you. And like I said, just because you say on your home study, I'm open to this, does not mean you have to say yes. You can ask a lot of questions before entering into a legal risk placement to make sure that you feel comfortable with what's going on and that you know you can handle it. I hope you found this helpful. If you did, could you just hit the thumbs up button so more people can find this video and can decide if legal risk adoption or adoption in general is right for them. Also, don't forget to look at my link below if you're interested in an adoption consultation, especially if you're looking into a legal risk case. I would love to help you through that. And it's something I have personal experience with, so I can definitely guide you through that process if that's what you need. Slots have been going a lot faster than I anticipated, so if you're interested, definitely do that soon before I narrow down my availability as the school year begins. Thank you so much for stopping by. It was great hanging out with you, and I look forward to seeing you next time.